Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I need to tell you about a decision that has been weighing on my heart for months. A decision that wasn't made impulsively, wasn't born out of anger, and wasn't chosen simply because of pressure from fans or media speculation. It's a decision that cuts much deeper than what people usually imagine when they hear rumors about idols and their personal lives. And the truth is, this decision reveals something troubling about the way Korea treats love, family, and freedom when you happen to be someone like me. For years, I've carried the dream of building my life in Korea, not only as a member of BTS, but also as a son, a brother, and eventually as a husband and a father. I've always believed in the power of hard work, discipline, and dedication to create something meaningful, something that benefits not just myself, but the people around me. The Korean dream for me was always about giving back to the place where I was born, the culture that shaped me, and the fans who gave me everything. But over the past few years, I started to notice shifts in the way love, privacy, and even marriage are perceived when it comes to idols. These changes weren't just cultural, though culture was a part of it. They were fundamental shifts in how people view truth, how they handle disagreement, and how they treat those who step outside the narrow definitions of what an idol is supposed to be. I saw how the public discourse around idols became less about supporting growth and happiness, and more about controlling every personal choice. I saw how quickly people who once said they loved you could turn against you if your choices didn't match their expectations. And the most concerning part was how society seemed to encourage this behavior, making it almost impossible for someone like me to live an honest life as both an artist and a human being. This isn't about politics or public positions. It's about something more basic, the right to live a life built on love and truth. The breaking point for me came when marriage entered the conversation. Suddenly, every aspect of my life, from who I love, to where I would live, to how I would raise a family, became a subject of debate, attack, and speculation. I watched as legitimate questions about privacy, respect, and independence were not met with understanding, but with demands, ultimatums, and coordinated efforts to push me into silence. I found myself in a position where speaking openly about marriage, about the person I love, about wanting a future outside the spotlight, meant risking not only my own peace, but also the peace of my family, my bandmates, and my partner. The choice became painfully clear. Speak my truth and watch everything I've worked for become a target of endless criticism, or stay silent and live with the weight of hiding the most important parts of my life. But silence isn't sustainable. When the truth of who you are becomes dangerous to admit, something in your society has broken. I had access, through my experiences, to the reality of how much control is exercised over idols, not just through management, but through media narratives, fan expectations, and cultural norms that make it nearly impossible to live authentically. What I saw wasn't just normal celebrity pressure. It was systematic control over what idols could be allowed to say, feel, or even hope for. I watched as platforms celebrated us when we followed the script, but punished us when we tried to step beyond it. I saw how people who were supposed to protect and support our growth became guardians of conformity, more concerned about maintaining a perfect image than protecting our humanity. And the personal cost of even questioning these boundaries became clear when several of my relationships with friends, with collaborators, even with family were threatened simply because I expressed a desire for a different future. Partners who had worked with me for years began to worry that associating with me would risk their own reputations if I chose marriage too openly. Companies that once praised my individuality began to hint that independence was dangerous for the brand. Even ordinary people in my life started to feel pressure from the shadow of my name. The message was clear: conform to the role of the idol forever, or pay the price of rejection and isolation. This wasn't happening because of a law or an official government order. It was happening through a culture of social punishment, media frenzy, and corporate caution. And in many ways, that is far more effective than direct control because it makes you police yourself. It teaches you to stay silent before anyone even asks you to. It convinces you that your truth is too costly to ever share. And so I began to ask myself difficult questions. If I can't speak openly about love, about marriage, about wanting a family, about choosing to live as a human being, then am I really free? If I can't raise my voice without fear of destroying everything I've worked for, then what kind of future am I building for myself and for the people I love? The answer was painful, but it was also clear. Sometimes you have to step outside a burning building to help put out the fire. Sometimes you have to take a step away from the place that raised you, not because you reject it, but because you want to preserve what's best in it. Leaving Korea after getting married isn't about abandoning my home. It's about creating space where I can live, speak, and love without the constant threat of retaliation. It's not a decision born from anger. It's not a choice made out of weakness. It's a recognition that if I am to keep giving my best to music, to art, to the fans, and to the future, I cannot spend all my energy defending my right to be human. I need room to breathe. I need room to be honest. And sometimes that room can only be found by taking a step away from where you started. When I first started talking about the possibility of marriage with the people closest to me, I realized something that shook me more deeply than I expected. It wasn't only about whether fans would accept it or how the media would spin it. It was about how even the people who loved me, who had supported me for years, began to look at me differently once I spoke the word marriage. It was as if my worth as an artist, as a public figure, was somehow incompatible with my worth as a man who wanted a family. That realization hit me harder than any criticism I had ever received. The more I thought about it, the more I began to notice a pattern that many idols before me had faced, but never dared to put into words. Every time someone tried to build a private life, to find happiness in love, the pressure from outside forces became unbearable. It was as if Korea itself had created a system where idols were celebrated as long as they stayed frozen in youth, forever single, forever perfect, forever available to be consumed. The moment you dare to step out of that role, you were marked as selfish, ungrateful, or even a traitor. This isn't just about the entertainment industry. It reflects something much deeper in the culture of fame here. When you cannot admit to wanting the most natural things in life, a partner, a home, a future without risking destruction, then you start to wonder what freedom really means. I realized that silence was not protecting me. It was eroding me from the inside. Every day I kept quiet about what I wanted. I was betraying the truth of who I am. And that betrayal was heavier than any hate comment could ever be. There was one moment that crystallized everything for me. I met an older friend of my family, a woman named Hana who was in her late 60s. She had been a fan of music her whole life. But more importantly, she had lived through the time when Korea was still struggling to rebuild after war, when freedom of expression was something fragile, something you could lose overnight. Hana told me a story I can't forget. She said, "When I was young, I believed that music could heal the nation. We listened to voices that gave us hope, that reminded us we were more than our circumstances. But as time passed, I began to see how the very people who gave us hope were being caged by the image we created for them. We wanted them to stay young forever, to never change, to never grow. And in doing so, we denied them the same freedoms that we ourselves demanded." Hana's words cut into me because they describe exactly what I was living. She told me about her younger brother, who had been a performer in small theaters decades ago. He fell in love, wanted to get married, but his community turned against him because they believed an artist belonged to the people, not to himself. Eventually, he left Korea to live abroad, not because he hated his country, but because he couldn't survive the constant punishment of wanting something as simple as love. When Hannah told me this story, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Jungkook, history repeats itself if we don't learn from it. You think you are the first to face this? No. But you have the chance to choose differently. You can protect your love by stepping away before the weight of expectations crushes you completely." Her perspective reminded me that what I was experiencing was not just a personal crisis. It was part of a cycle that Korea had repeated many times before. And the scariest part was realizing how willing people were to participate in it. Just as Hana had described, neighbors turned against neighbors when someone expressed an unapproved opinion. Fans who once cheered for you could become your harshest critics. Companies that once supported you could suddenly question your loyalty. The truth is, I don't want to become another name in a long list of idols who sacrifice their happiness just to maintain a perfect image. I don't want to grow older resenting the very people I dedicated my youth to, and I don't want to hide the person I love behind walls of secrecy, making them carry the burden of my silence. Leaving Korea after marriage isn't about rejecting my roots. It's about protecting what is most sacred to me: love, truth, and the right to live a full life without fear. I don't want to wake up one day realizing that I gave everything to music but nothing to the family I dreamed of building. I don't want to tell my children that their father was too afraid to stand up for the simplest truth. The decision is painful because Korea is my home. It is a place that gave me my voice, my career, my fans, my memories. But home should also be where love is safe, where truth is protected, and where freedom to grow is possible. And right now, I cannot find that balance here. Stepping away doesn't mean I will stop loving Korea. It means I will love it from a distance, hoping that one day it will embrace not just my music, but also my humanity. The more I lived with this decision inside me, the heavier it became. At first, I tried to convince myself that things would change, that people would eventually accept the idea of an idol getting married, that the storm of criticism would pass with time. But the reality was different. The pressure did not fade, it grew. Every headline, every article, every careless comment on social media reminded me that the simple desire to build a family could be turned into a crime in the eyes of those who wanted me to remain frozen in an image I could no longer sustain. I began to notice how the media framed even the smallest gestures. A ring on my finger became evidence. A glance at someone in the audience became speculation. A private dinner became breaking news. And in those headlines, I saw not just curiosity, but a deliberate attempt to control the story of my life. Journalists who once praised my achievements began to hint at betrayal, as if love itself was something shameful for me to feel. The narrative was not about me as a man with human desires, it was about protecting the illusion that had been built around me since I was 16. Behind the scenes, the pressure was even worse. Business meetings that were once about music, tours, or creative direction turned into subtle warnings about timing, image, and reputation. People who had promised to support me, no matter what, began to ask questions that revealed their fear. What will fans think? What will investors say? What if brands walk away? The implication was clear: my worth as a person was secondary to my worth as a product. And then there was the silence. The silence of people I had trusted for years who suddenly avoided the subject of my future. The silence of colleagues who looked away when the topic of marriage came up. The silence of institutions that should have defended my right to be human, but instead chose to protect their own interests. That silence was louder than any hate comment. It told me that the system was not built to protect truth, but to protect the illusion. I found myself spending more time managing the consequences of being honest than actually living my life. Every word had to be measured, every appearance rehearsed, every decision weighed against the possible backlash. The mental energy this consumed was enormous. I would sit in my room late at night, exhausted not from rehearsals or performances, but from the constant effort of hiding, the most natural part of myself. And in those moments, I asked myself the question I had been afraid to answer: how long can I live like this? The breaking point came when I realized that even the people closest to me, my partner, my family, were being drawn into the storm. They were being watched, speculated about, criticized simply for existing near me. My love, which should have been a source of strength, was turned into a weapon used against me. And that was when I understood. Staying silent was not protecting the people I loved. It was making them targets. Marriage is supposed to be about building a safe space together, about creating a foundation for a future. But in Korea, under the shadow of fame, it felt like marriage was being transformed into a battlefield. And I couldn't accept that. I couldn't let the most sacred decision of my life become ammunition for those who wanted to control me. It was then that I began to see leaving, not as an escape, but as a strategy. Just like an artist steps back from a canvas to see the bigger picture, I realized I needed distance to truly protect what mattered. If I stayed, the fight would consume everything: my partner's peace, my family's safety, my own mental health. But if I stepped away, I could continue to sing, to create, to share my heart without forcing the people I loved to pay the price of my honesty. I do not make this choice lightly. Korea is the soil where my roots were planted, but love is the water that keeps me alive. And if the soil has become too harsh for love to grow, then I must carry that love somewhere else, somewhere it can breathe. Leaving Korea after marriage is not about turning my back on where I came from. It is about protecting the truth of who I am and ensuring that love is not destroyed by the weight of expectations. There came a point when the whispers turned into direct pressure, when what was once hinted in private conversations became explicit demands. Meetings that had once been about music, creativity, and the joy of sharing with fans transformed into negotiations about my very existence as a person who wanted love and family. Suddenly, my career was no longer measured by the songs I sang or the performances I gave. It was measured by how well I could hide. I remember sitting across from people who had guided me for years, people I trusted, and hearing words that pierced deeper than any insult from strangers. If you go through with this, the consequences will be irreversible. Sponsors will pull out, contracts will collapse, fans will leave. These were not empty warnings, they were threats, spoken softly but sharpened with the weight of financial power. It was not just my future on the line, but the livelihoods of those who worked beside me, the families supported by the companies tied to my name. That was the hardest part. It wasn't the criticism from strangers that broke me. It was the realization that my choice to love could cost jobs, security, and peace for the people who had given their lives to help me succeed. How do you carry that burden? How do you choose between protecting your truth and protecting those who depend on you? Every day, that question clawed at me, tearing me in two. But the truth has a way of forcing itself forward, no matter how hard you try to bury it. The more I tried to bend to the expectations, the more I felt myself breaking. Smiling when I wanted to cry, hiding when I wanted to speak, apologizing for things that should never have been crimes. The energy it took to maintain that facade drained me more than any tour, more than any sleepless night in the studio. And I knew, deep down, that if I continued this way, I would lose not only my freedom, but my spirit. The moment that confirmed everything came during a negotiation about an international contract. A representative, someone who had only known me for a short time, looked me in the eye and said, "We need to know if the rumors about marriage are true. Because if they are, we will need to reconsider this entire partnership." It wasn't asked with concern. It was asked like a threat. In that instant, I realized I was no longer being treated as a man or an artist. I was being treated as a commodity whose value was determined by how well I fit into a mold. That was when it became undeniable. Staying silent, staying in Korea, would not protect me or the people I love. It would only prolong the inevitable destruction. Every time I tried to compromise, the demands grew harsher. Every time I tried to protect others by hiding, the shadows grew darker. I was no longer choosing between love and career. I was being forced to choose between being human and being a product. Leaving Korea after marriage became more than a choice. It became a necessity. Not because I stopped loving my country, not because I wanted to turn my back on fans, but because I realized that my humanity could not survive within these walls. And without my humanity, there would be no art, no music, no truth left to share. Sometimes the most painful decisions are the ones that set you free. And in that freedom, even if it comes at the cost of distance, there is hope not only for myself, but for everyone who believes that love and truth should never be punished. There was a moment when the tension that had been simmering in the background could no longer be ignored. For a long time, I told myself that maybe the pressure would ease, that people would eventually accept that I deserved a personal life outside the stage. But what I faced instead was the opposite. The scrutiny grew sharper, the whispers grew louder, and the threats became more direct. What once felt like distant noise suddenly filled every room I walked into. It started quietly. A message from a sponsor, a raised eyebrow in a meeting, a suggestion that I keep certain topics off limits. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just business, that it didn't matter. But over time, I realized the pattern. Every conversation I had with executives, managers, and partners wasn't about music anymore. It wasn't about creativity or performance. It was about control. It was about making sure I didn't say the wrong thing, about making sure I didn't confirm the truth. Everyone was too afraid to acknowledge. Then came the warnings. Not shouted, not written in bold letters, but whispered in ways that made their meaning even clearer. If you make this decision public, you will lose everything. The words were always softened with polite smiles, but I could feel the weight behind them. Sponsorships, contracts, even the loyalty of people I'd worked with for years. Everything suddenly had a condition attached to it. The condition was silence. I remember sitting in one particular meeting, surrounded by people who had been with me since the beginning. People I once thought would stand by me no matter what. And instead of encouragement, I heard fear. They were afraid of losing deals, afraid of the backlash, afraid of the image being broken. I could see it in their eyes. They weren't looking at me as Jungkook, the person, anymore. They were looking at me as a brand, a fragile symbol that had to be protected at all costs, even if it meant denying me the right to live, honestly. What hurt the most wasn't the criticism from strangers. It was that silence from those who should have defended me. When the people closest to you avoid the subject of your happiness, when their silence is louder than any words, you begin to understand how isolated you really are. That silence wasn't neutral. It was a decision, a choice to protect business over truth, reputation over love. And in that silence, I heard the message clearly: you don't belong to yourself anymore. The more I tried to compromise, the worse it became. I thought that if I kept quiet a little longer, if I hid the person I loved just a little more carefully, if I avoided the questions just one more time, maybe things would stabilize. But compromise was never enough. Every small silence became an invitation for more control. Every time I swallowed my truth, the demands became greater. And each demand carved away a little more of who I was. The breaking point came during an international negotiation. Someone across the table looked directly at me and said, "We need to know if the marriage rumors are true, because if they are, this partnership will need to be reconsidered." They didn't ask with kindness. They asked like it was a test, a trap, a way to remind me that my value could vanish if I chose honesty over image. In that moment, I felt the walls close in. I realized I was no longer being seen as an artist or even as a man. I was being treated as a product, my humanity reduced to a liability. This is the last thing I want to leave with you. No matter what the headlines say, no matter what the critics write, no matter how many voices try to twist a story, my decision comes down to one truth. I am choosing love. I am choosing freedom. I am choosing to live, honestly. Even if it means stepping away from the place I once thought I could never leave. I will always carry Korea in my heart. I will always carry the fans who stood by me, the memories we created, the music that was born here. But I cannot let fear dictate the rest of my life. And I hope you won't let fear dictate yours. So wherever you are, as you hear these words, remember this. You are allowed to love without apology. You are allowed to speak without shame. You are allowed to live without chains. And when the world tries to convince you otherwise, I hope you find the courage to step into your truth anyway. This is not the end of my story. It is only the beginning. And I promise you, wherever I go, my music will carry the same message. Love is worth everything, and truth is the only way we truly live. Thank you for walking this path with me. I will never forget it. And I hope in your own way, you will walk your path with the same courage. It was then that everything became clear. Staying in Korea, staying silent, trying to live in the shadows, none of that would protect me. None of that would save the people I loved from being dragged into this storm. The more I gave in, the more they would take. And the more they took, the less of myself would remain. I was not choosing between love and career anymore. I was being forced to choose between being human and being a commodity. Leaving Korea after marriage stopped being a possibility, it became a necessity. Not because I stopped loving my home, not because I wanted to abandon the stage or the fans, but because I understood that if I stayed, I would lose the most important parts of myself. And without that truth, without that freedom, there would be no music worth sharing, no art worth creating, no life worth living. Sometimes you don't leave because you want to. You leave because staying means destruction. And though it breaks my heart, I know that stepping away is the only way to preserve what matters most. Love, honesty, and the courage to keep singing as the person I truly am. The hardest truth I had to face wasn't about contracts or business. It wasn't about sponsors pulling out or headlines twisting the story of my life. The hardest truth was watching how the people I loved were being hurt simply because they were connected to me. Fame has a way of shining a light so bright that it burns everything it touches. And when that light turned toward the people closest to me, I realized I couldn't stand by and watch them be consumed. My family, who had always supported me quietly, began to feel the weight of my silence. They didn't ask for this life, yet suddenly their names, their faces, their private moments were being dragged into conversations they never wanted. My mother, who raised me with so much care, found herself questioned by strangers who thought they had the right to judge her for the choices I made. My father, who had always taught me the value of hard work, watched helplessly as rumors spread about his son's future, rumors he couldn't defend against without risking even more fire. And then there was the person I love, who never asked to be in the spotlight, but became a target the moment our bond became whispered about. Every glance, every movement, every shadow around them was turned into speculation. They couldn't walk freely, couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of thousands of eyes searching for proof. The love that should have been our sanctuary became our greatest vulnerability. Seeing their smile fade under the pressure, watching their joy dim because of a world that refused to let us live, those were the moments that broke me. I remember one night in particular, we were together, just the two of us, in a place far from the cameras, far from the noise. And even in that quiet space, I could feel the tension in their shoulders, the heaviness in their voice. They looked at me and said, "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" Not us, but all of this, the hiding, the fear, the silence. I didn't know how to answer because I had been asking myself the same question. And in that moment, I realized something I had been avoiding for too long. Silence was not protecting them. Silence was breaking them. I thought that by staying quiet, by carrying the burden alone, I could shield the people I love. But the truth was, my silence made them vulnerable. It made them targets of curiosity, suspicion, and cruelty. And that was when I understood with absolute clarity. Leaving Korea after marriage wasn't just about me. It was about giving the people I love the freedom to live without fear. But even beyond family and love, there were the fans. Not the ones who turned criticism into weapons. Not the ones who demanded perfection, but the ones who truly cared, who truly loved me as a person. I could feel their confusion, their pain, their worry. Some of them wrote messages that reached me late at night saying, "We just want you to be happy. We don't care about the rest." And those words gave me strength, but they also filled me with guilt. Because happiness was the one thing I couldn't seem to claim without hurting others in the process. I began to realize that Korea, for all the love and memories it gave me, had become a place where my truth was treated as betrayal. And if my truth was seen as betrayal, then the people I loved would always be punished alongside me. That was a cost I was no longer willing to pay. Leaving is not about turning my back on those who love me. It's about creating a space where that love can survive. It's about giving my family back their peace, giving my partner back their smile, giving myself back the freedom to sing without the chains of silence. Sometimes, protecting the people you love means walking away from the place you thought you would never leave. And though it hurts, it is the only way to make sure that love is not destroyed by the weight of expectations. When I started to accept the truth that leaving Korea might be the only way to protect what I love, I realized something else. I was not the first to face this kind of choice. At first, I thought my situation was unique, that no one could understand what it feels like to be an idol caught between the weight of fame and the simple desire for a normal life. But the more I looked around, the more I saw that my struggle was part of a larger story. A story that has repeated itself across generations, cultures, and countries. I met a man named Daniel, a Korean artist in his 70s who had left the country decades ago. He wasn't an idol, but he had been a painter. Someone whose work challenged the way people thought about society during a time when conformity was demanded. He told me about the backlash he faced when his art no longer fit into the approved narratives of his community. At first, he said, I thought I could endure it. I thought that if my art was honest, people would eventually see the truth. But instead, the walls closed in. My family suffered, my friends turned distant, and suddenly I realized the only way to keep painting was to leave. Hearing Daniel's story struck me deeply because it mirrored what I was living in my own way. His choice to leave wasn't about abandoning his roots. It was about preserving the core of who he was. He told me that distance gave him clarity, that leaving allowed him to love Korea from afar, without being suffocated by the systems that had tried to silence him. Sometimes, he said, you protect your home best by stepping away from it. Distance is not rejection, it is survival. Daniel's words reminded me of Hana's story, and they connected to something I had always known, but never wanted to admit. That Korea is not just a place of love and support, but also a place of unrelenting pressure. It gives with one hand and takes with the other. It celebrates you when you follow the script, and punishes you when you write your own. And yet, people like Daniel showed me that leaving doesn't mean losing. It means choosing life over destruction, truth over silence. It wasn't just artists I thought about. I remember stories of ordinary people, immigrants, families, young couples who left Korea because they wanted something the country couldn't yet give them. Freedom to love without judgment, to live without the constant watch of society, to raise children without the fear of being crushed by expectations. These stories were not about betrayal. They were about courage. And slowly, I began to see my own decision, not as an act of weakness, but as part of that same courage. Every time I thought about leaving, I wrestled with guilt. How could I walk away from the place that gave me my voice? How could I step outside when so many fans still looked to me for strength? But Daniel's voice echoed in my heart. If you destroy yourself to stay, then you give nothing back. But if you preserve yourself to leave, you might still give something meaningful. Those words reshaped the way I looked at my choice. Leaving wasn't about running away. It was about ensuring that my love, my truth, my music could still exist in the world without being crushed. And I knew then that my story, no matter how painful, could be part of something bigger. It could be a reminder to others that freedom is not something you wait for. It is something you protect, even if it costs you the comfort of staying where you are. It could be a way to honor the sacrifices of those before me who made the same painful choice. And it could be a message to those who come after me, that love is never wrong, that truth is never a crime, and that sometimes leaving is the most honest act of love you can give. The thought gave me strength. For the first time, I began to see leaving not only as loss, but also as opportunity, an opportunity to live fully, to protect the people I love, and to continue singing not as an idol bound by silence, but as a man who chose freedom. And though the pain of distance would always be real, I knew that with distance came clarity, and with clarity came the chance to build something lasting. For most of my life, I have lived as Jungkook, the idol, the performer, the voice on the stage, the image on the screen. But in the quietest moments, when the lights fade and the noise disappears, I am simply Jungkook. And it is Jungkook who has been struggling the most with this decision. Because while Jungkook the idol belongs to the world, Jungkook belongs to himself, to his family, to the person he loves, to the life he dreams of building beyond the spotlight. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself a question that refused to let me sleep. Who am I allowed to be? Am I forever the boy who stepped on stage at 15 and never stepped off? Am I forever frozen in the image of an idol who cannot change, cannot grow, cannot love? Or am I allowed to be the man who longs for a home, for children's laughter, for the touch of a hand that grounds me in reality? The battle between those two selves tore at me. Every interview, every photo shoot, every performance, there was always a part of me that wondered if I was betraying oneself to keep the other alive. When I spoke as Jungkook, I felt strong but incomplete. When I lived as Jungkook, I felt whole but guilty. And I realized that the world had made me believe those two selves could never coexist. But why not? Why must being an idol mean surrendering the right to be human? Why must music be chained to silence about love? Why must I choose between the voice that belongs to millions and the heart that belongs to one? These questions haunted me, not because I didn't know the answers, but because I did. The truth is, no one can live as half of themselves forever. And if I tried, eventually both parts of me would break. I remembered one moment backstage after a performance where I had given everything on stage, but felt emptier than ever afterward. I looked at myself in the mirror, sweat still dripping, lights still flashing outside, and I whispered, "Who are you, really?" For a second, I didn't recognize the face staring back. It wasn't that I had lost myself, it was that I had buried myself so deeply beneath the expectations of others that I could barely breathe. That was when it became clear. If I stayed in Korea after marriage, if I continued to live under the weight of both identities colliding, I would lose not only my freedom but the very essence of who I am. I would be forced to live a double life forever. Jungkook the idol who smiled, and Jungkook the man who hid. And that was not a life, that was a prison. Leaving Korea then became not just about protecting love or shielding family. It became about uniting the two parts of myself that had been at war for so long. It became about giving Jungkook the idol and Jungkook the man a chance to finally breathe as one, without masks, without fear, without chains. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine it, a place where I could walk down the street hand in hand with the person I love, without cameras hiding in corners. A place where I could speak about marriage without watching headlines twist my words into weapons. A place where Jungkook could still sing, but Jungkook could live. That vision was not about running away. It was about becoming whole. And maybe that's the hardest part for people to understand, that idols are not machines built to entertain forever. We are people, fragile and flawed, carrying dreams that go beyond the stage. My decision to leave after marriage is not a rejection of music or of the fans who gave me everything. It is a declaration that I am ready to live as a complete human being, not a divided one. There was a time when the thought of leaving Korea felt like the end of everything I had built. I imagined empty stadiums, silent songs, and a distance so wide that I could never cross it again. I thought leaving meant losing my fans, my stage, my identity. But as I wrestled with that fear, a new understanding began to grow within me. Leaving was not the end. It was the beginning of something I had never truly allowed myself to imagine. A life where music and love could exist side by side without destroying each other. For years, I believed that my career demanded sacrifice. That in order to be Jungkook the idol, Jungkook the man had to stay hidden. But what if that belief was never true? What if the real sacrifice was never allowing myself to live honestly? The more I asked this question, the more I realized that the narrative of loss was only part of the story. There was also the possibility of freedom, of creation, of rebirth. I began to picture what life could look like beyond the borders of the only home I had ever known. I imagined waking up not to headlines about who I was seen with, but to the quiet laughter of a family. I imagined writing songs, not out of fear of judgment, but out of the fullness of my heart. I imagined walking on a stage in another country, knowing that the audience wasn't there to trap me in a role, but to share in the truth of who I was becoming. That vision no longer felt like loss, it felt like hope. One night, I was on the phone with a friend who had moved abroad years earlier. They told me something that stayed with me. Distance can break you, or it can free you. It depends on how you choose to use it. At first, I was afraid that distance from Korea would break me, that being away from the familiar streets, the language of my childhood, the fans who shaped me, would leave me hollow. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that distance could also be a gift. It could give me clarity, it could give me safety, it could give me the chance to protect what matters most without being consumed by the noise. I understood then that leaving was not about abandoning my roots. My roots will always be in Korea. They will always be in the rehearsal rooms where I bled and cried, in the stages where I gave everything, in the fans who stood by me through every storm. But roots are only the beginning of a tree's story. To grow, a tree must reach upward, outward, beyond the soil it started in. And that is what leaving means for me. Not cutting off my roots, but allowing myself to grow. The turning point came when I realized that staying would mean endless battles, endless compromises, endless hiding. But leaving meant a chance to begin again with honesty, with love, with music that came from a place of truth instead of fear. And the more I embraced that vision, the more I saw that it was not just about survival, it was about renewal. So when people ask me why I would ever think of leaving Korea after marriage, I want them to understand this. It is not because I have stopped loving where I came from. It is because I want to continue loving my family, my partner, my fans, my music without losing myself in the process. Sometimes leaving is not the end of a story. Sometimes leaving is the only way to write the next chapter. As I've walked through this decision, I've come to realize that my story is not only about me. It is about something much larger, something that touches anyone who has ever felt torn between the life they are expected to live and the life they truly long for. My choice to leave Korea after marriage may seem personal, but it is also a reflection of a question that so many of us face in different forms. What do you do when the truth of who you are collides with the expectations of the world? For some, that collision comes in their career when they are told they must follow a path chosen by others. For others, it comes in love, when they are told who they can or cannot give their heart to. For still others, it comes in silence, when their voices are dismissed because they don't fit into the script of what society wants to hear. The details may be different, but the struggle is the same. The fight between conformity and authenticity, between safety and freedom, between being accepted and being whole. I've learned that courage does not always look like standing on a stage before thousands. Sometimes courage looks like choosing to protect your family, even when the world calls it betrayal. Sometimes courage is walking away from applause to build a quieter life filled with truth. Sometimes courage is risking the loss of what you've built to preserve the love that can carry you through every storm. This isn't just about idols, or about Korea, or about me. It's about the universal truth that love is worth protecting, even when protecting it costs you everything else. It's about the belief that freedom of the heart is as important as freedom of speech, and that without it, no amount of success or recognition can fill the emptiness inside. I want those listening to understand this. My leaving does not mean surrender. It does not mean that I've stopped believing in the beauty of music or the connection we've built. It means I am choosing to honor that connection by staying true to myself. Because if I continue to sing while hiding, my songs would eventually lose their soul. But if I sing as a man who has chosen truth and love, then every note will carry the weight of freedom. And that freedom will belong to everyone who hears it. I know that not everyone will understand. Some will call it selfish, others will call it weak. But the truth is, only those who have faced the cost of honesty can truly understand the courage it takes. And for those who feel trapped in their own silence, I want my story to be a reminder. You are not alone. The fight to be yourself is never easy, but it is always worth it. Leaving Korea after marriage is my act of courage. Yours may look different. Maybe it's speaking a truth you've held back. Maybe it's pursuing a dream others call impossible. Maybe it's choosing love when the world tells you to let it go. Whatever form it takes, courage is not about being fearless. It is about being willing to carry fear with you as you step into the life you know is right. And so my message is simple. Protect your truth no matter the cost. Because truth, once lived, has the power to change not only your life, but the lives of those who come after you. Now that I have told you the journey that brought me here, I want to leave you with something more than just my story. Because in the end, this is not only about where I live, or the choices I make, or the battles I have faced. It is about what all of us are willing to protect and what we are willing to risk for the sake of truth and love. When I think about leaving Korea after marriage, I don't see it as closing a door. I see it as opening one. A door to a future where I can live fully as myself, where my music can be born from honesty instead of fear, where the person I love is no longer treated as a secret but as a partner standing proudly by my side. This decision may carry pain, but it also carries freedom. And with that freedom, I believe I can give back more than I ever could while living in silence. I know some will not understand. Some will say I am abandoning my roots, that I am choosing myself over the country that raised me. But the truth is, I carry Korea in my heart no matter where I go. Every note I sing, every stage I stand on, every moment I share with fans around the world, it all comes from the boy who grew up here, the boy who dreamed here, the boy who was given a chance to stand before millions because of this country. Leaving does not erase that. It preserves it by allowing me to continue without being broken. And I want you to ask yourself something. What is one truth you have been too afraid to speak? What is one dream you have hidden because the world told you it was impossible? What is one love you have kept in the shadows because you feared the judgment of others? Maybe your answer feels small compared to mine, but the weight of silence is the same, and the freedom that comes from breaking it is the same too. I have learned that freedom does not come from waiting for permission. It comes from choosing to live honestly, even when the cost is high. It comes from saying, "This is who I am," even when others would rather you remain silent. And it comes from refusing to let fear decide the story of your life. My choice to leave Korea after marriage is not about running away from fear. It is about walking toward truth. It is about building a life where love is not punished, where family is not a weakness, where music is not chained by silence. And I believe that by making this choice, I can give something back, not just to those who have supported me, but to anyone who has ever wondered if they, too, are allowed to live honestly. So, as I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with this thought. The fight for truth and love is never easy, but it is always worth it. Whether you are standing on a stage or sitting quietly in your own room, your truth matters, your love matters, and your courage to live them out can change more than you realize. I am Jungkook. I am Jungkook, the idol. I am both, and I am whole. And as I step into this next chapter of my life, I carry with me the hope that my story will remind you of this simple truth. You are allowed to live as yourself, and that is the greatest freedom any of us can ever claim. When I look back at everything I have shared, I realize that this story is not just about leaving a country or making a personal choice. It is about confronting the very essence of what it means to live with honesty. For so long, I thought strength meant carrying the weight of silence, enduring expectations, and protecting others by burying my own truth. But what I've learned is that true strength lies in the courage to stand up, even when your voice shakes, even when the world pushes back. Leaving Korea after marriage is more than a personal decision. It is a declaration that love is not negotiable. It is a reminder that no career, no image, no system has the right to define whether a person is allowed to build a life of their own. I know the world will always have opinions, and that those opinions will often be harsh. But opinions cannot erase truth. Opinions cannot destroy love. And opinions cannot silence a heart that has chosen to live fully. As I prepare for what comes next, I am not stepping into the unknown with fear. I am stepping into it with gratitude. Gratitude for the years I spent here, for the fans who lifted me higher than I ever imagined, for the family who gave me roots, and for the love that gives me wings. Gratitude, because even in the struggles, I discovered something unshakable. That no matter where I go, no matter how far I travel, the essence of who I am remains. This journey has also taught me something about responsibility. Having a platform means more than performing or entertaining. It means using your voice to speak truths others may be afraid to say. It means showing that idols are not untouchable figures, but human beings who feel, who love, who struggle, just like everyone else. And if my decision inspires even one person to embrace their own truth, then every sacrifice will have been worth it. I know some of you may be wondering what this means for the future. Will I stop singing? Will I disappear from the stage? The answer is no. Music is not something I can leave behind. It is part of my blood, part of my soul. But now, my music will carry something even deeper. It will carry the honesty of a man who no longer hides. It will carry the love of someone who finally chose to protect what matters most. It will carry the freedom of someone who stepped away, not to abandon, but to renew. And so, I want to leave you with this thought. Life will always ask you to choose. Sometimes the choices are small, and sometimes they change everything. But in the end, what defines you is not the comfort of staying silent, but the courage to live your truth out loud. Do not wait for permission. Do not wait for the world to be ready. If you know what is right for your heart, step into it, even if it means leaving behind what you thought you could never let. I am leaving Korea after marriage not because I stopped loving it, but because I want to continue loving without fear. And my hope is that wherever you are, whatever you face, you will find the courage to do the same. Because the greatest legacy any of us can leave is not the applause we gather, but the truth we lived and the love we protected. As I stand at this point in my journey, I realize that every story eventually comes to a moment of closure, a moment when you gather everything you have lived and distill it into one truth that cannot be shaken. For me, that truth is simple. Love is worth everything. It is worth the risk, the loss, the distance, the misunderstanding. It is worth walking away from comfort and stepping into the unknown. Because without love, without the courage to live it and protect it, everything else eventually fades. Leaving Korea after marriage is not the ending of my story. It is a continuation of it. It is me taking everything I have learned as Jungkook the idol and everything I have felt as Jungkook the man and uniting them into one life, one voice, one truth. I do not want to look back decades from now and see a man who lived for applause but never for himself. I want to look back and see someone who chose courage over fear, truth over silence, and love over conformity. I know this decision will not be understood by everyone. Some will say I betrayed expectations. Others will say I gave up on the place that made me who I am. But what I know is this: real loyalty is not blind obedience. Real loyalty is honoring the values that gave you life in the first place. Korea taught me discipline, resilience, and passion. And now I honor those lessons by using them to protect my freedom and my family. That is not betrayal. That is gratitude in action. And so I turn to you, the ones listening now. You may not be standing on a stage. You may not be facing cameras or headlines, but you have your own battles, your own truths waiting to be spoken. Do not let fear silence you. Do not let the expectations of others suffocate the life you were meant to live. Whether it is in love, in career, in the smallest choices or the greatest decisions, let courage guide you. Ask yourself, what will you leave behind when your time in this world is done? Will it be a record of silence, of hiding, of living by someone else's rules? Or will it be a legacy of truth, of love, of the courage to stand even when standing came with a cost? That choice is yours, and it is one no one else can make for you. My hope is that my story serves as a mirror, that in my choice, you see your own choices more clearly, that in my courage, you find a spark of your own, and that in my love, you remember that love is never something to be ashamed of. It is the greatest gift we are given and the greatest gift we can give back. So this is not goodbye. This is a new beginning. I will continue to sing, to share, to live, not as a divided self, but as a whole one. And as I step forward, I carry with me the belief that the truest measure of a life is not how perfectly it pleased others, but how honestly it was lived. And if you take anything from my journey, let it be this: never be afraid to live your truth. Because one day, when the lights fade and the noise is gone, truth is the only thing that remains, and it will be the one thing that makes your story eternal. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then I want to speak to you now, not as Jungkook the performer, not as the face you've seen on stages and screens, but as Jungkook, the man who sits quietly with his thoughts when the lights are gone. I want to look you in the eyes, wherever you are, and let you know that what I am sharing with you comes from the most honest part of me. For so long, I lived in a world where every move was rehearsed, every word weighed, every smile calculated. And I know many of you only ever saw that side of me, the polished image, the idol who seemed untouchable. But behind that image was someone who carried doubts, fears, and longings just like anyone else. Someone who wanted to love without hiding, who wanted to dream without limits, who wanted to breathe without asking for permission. Leaving Korea after marriage is not just about geography. It is about choosing to stop dividing myself into pieces. It is about saying, this is who I am, fully, completely, without apology. And I want you to know that you have that same right. No matter where you come from, no matter what people expect of you, your truth matters. Your love matters. Your voice matters. I am not asking you to agree with my decision. I am asking you to see yourself in it. Because every one of us faces a moment when we must decide whether to live for others or live for ourselves. And when that moment comes, I hope you remember this story. I hope you remember that even someone like me, who seemed to have everything, still had to make the same choice you will face, to choose truth, even when it hurts. I want you to carry this with you, not as a farewell, but as a reminder. Life is not measured by how perfectly we satisfy expectations. It is measured by how deeply we live our truth. And if my story gives you the courage to take one step closer to that truth, then everything I have endured will have meaning. So wherever you are, as you listen to this, I want you to pause for a moment. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what is the truth I have been afraid to speak? What is the love I have been afraid to protect? What is the dream I have been afraid to chase? And then promise yourself that one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day, you will choose courage over fear. Because if there is anything I have learned, it is this. The world does not change when we hide. It changes when we live, honestly. And when we live honestly, we not only free ourselves, we give permission for others to do the same. This is the legacy I want to leave. Not only the music, not only the performances, but the courage to live fully. And if that courage lives in you after hearing my story, then I know this journey was worth every step.